Greetings. Welcome to the Cafe Genius Impresario Radio Show, this time in podcast form, episode 7. We are recording on today, the 10th of April, 2023, and I am joined today by the one and only Tyler Williams.
Thanks for having me. Excited to be here.
Thanks for being here. Looking forward to the gist of this whole entire project, the whole Cafe Genius Impresarios and the whole Cafe Genius in general is basically getting down with our entrepreneurial ecosystem and elevating things going on in it, the people and the projects and whatnot. So you have been here for a lot of it. And so I'm excited to talk to you about a lot of things today. But first of all, before we even get started, some people, I don't know who they are, the 2 or 3 of them, but some people will have no idea who you are. So on my notes, I have the first item. Who is Tyler?
Yeah. Happy to introduce myself. Love supporting the community and all things about the community. I originally grew up in Alaska. So, very sheltered life, and got into music, became a touring musician. That brought me down to Southern California in my early 20s. And, kind of bounced around between, I first lived in Escondido, San Diego area, and then Orange County, and then Seattle. Went back up to Alaska to marry my now wife. We've been married 18 years. And we also dated through high school. But while I was touring, she finished college. And then got called by a band called Theory of Flight, kind of the same time that in Vegas, like Imagine Dragons was coming up through the scene. We were coming up through the scene, and we got signed. They got signed by EMI Universal. It was EMI first, and we toured for 2 years, and that brought me to Vegas. So, we toured for 2 years with that band, and came back to Vegas. And when EMI merged with Universal, what happened was they dropped all their non-profitable bands. So I was a drummer. So we kind of came back to Vegas with our tail between our legs, defeated. And my wife took a tour of this company called Zappos. And at the time, they were located in Henderson. Right. She was a Monster Energy girl. So she would drive around in this big monster truck. You might have seen it around Vegas and pass out free monsters. And that got her a tour of Zappos. And then she came back home, and I at the time I was looking at I was actually at my final interview to potentially be the drummer for the house band of the Blue Man Group. And she said, well, why don't you just take a look at something other than music? And I know myself, and I saw the lifestyle of being a Vegas musician that's just like playing in the clubs or the nightclubs or the shows. And I saw a lot of unhealthy patterns, that existed in there. And so then I looked up Zappos online, saw this company that it was hard to figure out what they actually did for money. It was all talking about core values, employee happiness. The CEO, Tony Hsieh, had just written this book called Delivering Happiness. So I read it, and I immediately became a huge fan of what the company was all about. And while I was doing my research to see if I could apply, and keep in mind, I barely graduated high school. I skipped college because I thought my destiny, I'm going to be a musician. What do I need to have college for? And I was terrible in school. I was just a creative, hyperactive individual, which is why I think drumming suited me so well. So then I come to this statistic that I read online. I'm not sure if it was true. I believed it at the time. It said that it was harder to get into Zappos than to get into Harvard. And so I got really disheartened about that. But again, my wife, my anchor and support, she said, my wife's name is Alyssa Williams, by the way. She came to me and said, well, you're very creative. You're talented. Inside of music, you've developed the ability to not write music, but also record it, produce it. I knew how to do video editing. And so at this time, we had a studio that we worked out of. So I wrote a song based on Zappos' 10 core values. I recorded it. I made a video. It's on YouTube. It's
Hmm.
kind of funny. You just if you YouTube Tyler Zappos, there's like 8 of me playing different instruments, and I sing a song about their core values. And I just sent that into their head HR person because my wife had his card, and no resume or nothing. And they called me in about 2 hours and said, "Come on down, we'll figure something out." And that's they. At first, I was interviewing to potentially be, on their production team to do video editing, and they said, "Well, we like to hire from within. We don't know you. We don't know if you're a culture fit yet. That's a
Right.
big deal to us. So if you wanted in the door, start in the call center." And at the time, it was like I think $15 an hour, and it would have been a pretty big step back for me financially. But man, I drank the Kool-Aid. I loved what everything was about, and honestly, the fact that they hired that position from within and didn't offer it to me, it also showed me, well, they practice what they preach. I got in the door at Zappos, answering phone calls. Within about 9 months, I was training in the call center for the new hire training. And then from there, I was just helping out with a lot of events and things at Zappos because my background being, production, construction, and music, I just kind of worked my way into becoming known as the Fungineer. And so there was this particular moment in my career where the CEO, he was speaking. He lived downtown in this huge high rise called the Ogden, which I think most people listening to this would know what the Ogden is. And he had a bunch of people from Amazon and Disney. They're basically visiting in town for a conference, and they all wanted to come for this mixer in Tony's apartment, and he was going to do a speech. He's going to speak about Downtown Project. And I was up there, and I got called by his assistant saying, "Hey, we're panicking. We don't know what to do. All these people are showing up, but there's no microphone. There's no video." So I grabbed some projectors, I grabbed some screens, I grabbed some speakers, I grabbed a lapel mic, and I came up to his apartment, set it all up, and he had a speech. And at that time, the chief of staff, her name is Jamie Naughton, she pulled me aside and she said, "Hey, what do you want to do at Zappos? Obviously, you shouldn't be answering phones. You've built a reputation up from your video coming in and all of these things." And so she's like, "Well, write a job description, name it whatever you want, and ask what you want to get paid." And so I said, "I want to be the Fungineer. I want to help throw events and parties and do production and program and make the employees happy. Yeah, this is, what I want to get paid." And she said, "Yep, approved. Let's do it." So I became the Fungineer. Then the Fungineer became a department. We had about 10-person team. And then again, Tony, the CEO, pulled me aside and said, "Well, I think that this is a great story, and that also you should be doing brand marketing." And he created a role called Brand Aura, which is a much larger role. So it was about a 70-person team at its height. And it really largely did a lot of storytelling, community work, philanthropy, culture, engagement programs, and brand marketing, stunts, fun things. It was a very fun role. And then I did that for about 6 years. And then unfortunately, COVID hit. Our CEO, Tony, he struggled with a mental health breakdown, retired, and subsequently passed away. And so for the last 2 years, I've been heading up culture and community work within Zappos, and I just resigned 2 months ago, and now we're here.
I can't help but feel that was a interesting story, but I can't but help but feel we've only heard the beginning of this journey you've been on. I
Yeah,
I
that's
will
the
say,
high. That's the 30,000 foot.
yeah,
Yeah, just there's a lot to unpack there.
sure.
Yeah, we
Well,
could probably do a series
sure.
on the
Yeah, that's
chapters.
don't tempt me. I mean, anything's possible. The joy of self-publishing, right?
Yeah.
The thing, a lot of people. So in my travels, I'm just going to jump in and respond to some of a couple of things you said. So first of all, I read Tony's book as well. I actually did the audio version also, so I heard him reading it, which was an interesting data point. I also listened to Kitchen Confidential as read by Anthony Bourdain. I think when an author reads their own book, you get all the missing pieces you would get otherwise.
Yeah.
So,
I,
so I, go
speaking of
ahead.
which, Matthew
Yeah,
McConaughey's book, Red Lights or Green Lights, I think. Me and my wife listened to that. It's phenomenal because his voice. It's
yeah,
like,
yeah.
whoa.
Yeah. Oh, I'm convinced. Maybe Matthew McConaughey. I believe Anthony Bourdain should be up on the list. For better or worse, their voices will be deep faked, and we'll have books read by Anthony Bourdain for the rest of our lives. So that would be fine, I think. But uh, whether his estate, whether his estate would be okay with that. But I used to work at Netscape many years ago, and we were able to be creative with our titles. So I was working in the security group at the time at secure email and all that, and encryption and other fun things. And so they said, "Oh, you have to go get your business cards. You have to pick a title." And I said, "Let me think about that. Let me think." And I was still a very junior engineer at the time, and I was like, "I'm in security," so my title was in security. And my my two highlights. One of my colleagues she was working on SMIME, email secure email,
Yeah.
and so Lisa was working on that, and she was about to go on maternity leave, and she also was like, I should pick a title. I've never, because she was there from the very early days. So I just went S Mom, and she's like, I will go get the form right now. So she was S Mom, and then and I do have a point to this, right? But another colleague of mine, we were at lunch one day, and everybody said, Tom, you should get what are you going to do? And I said, Judge, Jury, and Executioner. He literally stood up, stopped eating, stood up, and got the form, and that was his title. So the point of that story is that there is a certain fun that companies could and should allow when it comes to, you're not the senior software engineer, you are the fun engineer, as you said. Or
Yeah.
I think that gets lost sometimes. Sometime when like at Netscape, when you had the pictures on the badges, people started to say, oh, things are changing. I used to know everybody, you didn't have to have a picture on the badge. Now it's who knows who's who and whatnot. But
And that's one of the hard things about when companies begin to scale is and this is one of the things that we worked really hard at Zappos was to avoid that scale hurting the culture. It was, how do you scale culture, keep culture really strong as the company is going through these massive growth phases. It's really hard. It's one of the most difficult things for companies to do. And then a lot of times that early core group, or the people that are, kind of the beginning people of a company, they begin to lose interest because it just loses that camaraderie that it had at one point,
yeah, the reason. So before we started recording, we were kind of touching on this, and I would say there's the time before, and you said 100 people, so let's say it's 100 people. So before 100 people were joining the company because a friend, or they knew what they were working on, or the character, or the whatever the reason. But you join this little group. I'm not really fond of the work family notion. I think that's too easy to sort of believe you're in a family, but you're still at work. But either way, there's some number at which you stop, as I said, you stop knowing your coworkers, you stop recognizing, by name, and like, I don't even know who that is anymore. I don't know who's doing what. Email addresses of people you've never met, things, and I wonder, is that just scale, or is that when there are external interests, outside investors, or you go public and now you have your fiduciary responsibilities to investors there, you have Wall Street looking at you, all this stuff starts, and they're looking at you through a classic lens of like, we don't want all this funny title business. Does
It's
that
all of the
happen?
it's all of the above. It's all of those pressures play a factor in changing and putting pressure on a company's culture. And one of the things we realized at Zappos, and going back to the whole family thing, one of our core values was build a positive team and family spirit. And we got the question a lot of, well, there's a lot of families that are really toxic and unhealthy, and it's ridiculous to think of a company as a family. And we actually considered quite a bit of changing that maybe to the word community, build a positive team and, community spirit that's positive, things of that nature. But, I think that one of the hardest things for a company to do is retain its kind of founding culture, its founding mentality, its founding values as it grows. And one of the things that we did at Zappos early on, and this was before my time, so I have to say I joined Zappos in 2011 when it was already very famous for its culture.
Right.
So I didn't actually help build that, but one of their defining moments was creating those values and then saying, we are going to hold extremely tight to these values. We're going to hire and fire for these values. There was an amazing amount of thought and ways in which they did that. A couple that I think are famous in the book is one, and we kind of did as hiring managers later on. We did our own version of how we would test people's character. Well, one of them was we would send a shuttle to pick the potential candidate up. As they would come to the office, the shuttle driver would kick up a conversation with them. They would, have kind of questions and ways of probing. And when the candidate got through the hiring process, we would ask the shuttle driver, what did you think? And if they weren't kind or compassionate, because people become very good at interviewing.
Oh yeah.
And then let's say they passed that and they were kind. Then they enter into 30 days of new hire training, which was very expensive. But I think it's one of the most powerful things that Zappos did, because regardless if you were coming in as a technical director, a CTO, an executive, whoever you were put in a 30-day, very intense new hire training program that was, hey, look, we're interviewing you and you're interviewing us. And so, let's say, and you had to learn to answer customer phone calls. So it was also a lesson in humility, right?
Sure.
We're going to teach you how to answer our customer phone calls, and you're going to be on the phone for 15 days and just like a call center agent. And that was a powerful move too, because I saw as a new hire trainer, because I was a new hire trainer for about a year, that you really see that ego come out in people, because we provided them with feedback on their phone calls. So we're sitting down. Here's somebody who might be coming in as an executive. This new hire trainer that's a call center agent is giving you feedback of what you did wrong on your phone call. Hey, you didn't verify the customer, or hey, why didn't you, try for a personal emotional connection? And you just see kind of the anger well up in people of kind of how dare you, And I thought that was brilliant, because one of the 10th core value at Zappos was be humble. And that's one of that's a very difficult core value to embody and hold tight to. And in that new hire training role, I saw several candidates um lose their cool, and those that core value get completely thrown out the window, and that feedback would be given to the hiring manager, and more often than not they would not get into Zappos.
Sure.
And it wasn't a perfect system, because obviously in 1,500 employees plus you're never going to get 100% of perfect. And also, even if you have a shared set of values, people are going to in moments act outside of those core values. It's more so like that's an anchor point that you can hold people to, and but not expect perfection.
Sure. So have you ever worked in you I know you're a musician, but have you ever worked in retail? Like I worked at McDonald's when I was in high school.
I
Uh,
haven't. No.
so I will tell. So I rose through the ranks rather quickly because I'm apparently genetically predisposed to be a McDonald's employee. But I was
Yeah.
so I was I actually lied on my I made a fake birth certificate so I could get in at 15 and a half or something.
That's
So I was working
amazing.
there. Yeah. Nowadays, there's no NFTs or to pay. Anyway, so or there weren't. So I started working at McDonald's. You started out. It was in a mall. It was in the Metro Center Mall in Phoenix. So it was super busy, and so they started you out in the lobby, right? So you're starting out interacting with customers directly and cleaning up after them and answering questions. And there's the bathroom, and then you move to the register, and you're working on the ordering and placing orders, and then you got to interact with the kitchen, and then you're in the kitchen and you're cooking food and you're interacting with the front. So the whole thing. And then I became a crew trainer, and I was making the big dollars. I think I was making almost $4 an hour. Speaking of the good old days, so minimum wage was like 285 or something.
Whoa.
So it was 1986.
Yeah, it's
It's a
hard to
while ago.
imagine, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, no, I don't have to imagine. I was there, but uh, but I mean, everything was cheaper. My gas for my car was 79 cents a gallon, so it was a very different time. And if you're listening to this, you want to make fun of me, you can do it all you want later. I was there. So, but the take home is that I'm not going to say it's identical, but and for young people, especially because you're all high school age, which means all the things that you know about high school kids when you put them in the same room. So all these people going through puberty and having to work together and service customers and each other probably after work, but they were doing basically what you just described, right? You're interacting with customers. They would always do these evaluations. There'd always be Michelle was the store manager. She would always be looking over from the kitchen, and then you'd like, hey, come here, and she'd show you the clipboard and like, okay, you took too long on this, and you're like, oh, okay. I mean, it was required. Just the infrastructure was around a continuous evaluation system, but to your point, like it wasn't like they were attacking you. It was like, hey, you took too long on that one thing, or they would sometimes pull drawers and count them down to make sure you're doing your change correctly and all that. So it was a good learning experience. Certainly, I always tell people if you never worked in a restaurant or some sort of interacting with people in your early days, you probably missed out because there's a
Yeah.
lot to learn not only about customers, but about your coworkers and about management, about showing up to work on time and punching in and punching out and all the things. So to this day, even though it's McDonald's, it's not necessarily the most healthy food, and they do change food marketplaces, which is another topic for another day. But certainly, I think a valuable work experience. And so, although I will
I
say,
agree. I agree. I think
go ahead.
if you don't work in something that has, customer service or you're getting feedback regularly because, what that did, if it basically gave you this feedback isn't a negative thing. Feedback isn't like I'm in trouble, or this is a negative thing. It's like here's how we get better. Here's how
Right,
we exchange information, give you the information that you need so that you can improve, and that's just better for everybody. You know, I at Zappos we had this just feedback culture of like you were constantly getting feedback, and it actually felt really good because you had that personal emotional connection with the people that you worked with. So it's like
right.
talking to a friend that's like, hey, let's do this better,
Well, the other thing that's often lost is and by the way, we both Tyler's expressing his allergies more loudly, but my voice you can hear is a little. So we're both enjoying the Las Vegas croup or whatever. It happens
Yeah.
every year. April. I'll tell you my Ireland story in a sec. But the take home to me. So I was 16 basically for most of the time I was there, and yeah, okay. Michelle says, "Yeah, you took more than a minute to do this," or nothing horrendous. I was never like shown the door or anything, but it would be very easy to take that personally. But I think you've already intimated this. But the bottom line is you're representing the company you work for and your coworkers. So if you do that and you can improve here or there, that actually helps everybody, not just yourself. So if you look at it as just me, then you're like you're reading the wrong guidelines or something. And you learn how to work with each other, right? So these 16-year-old kids and having to work with adults that are telling you what to do, and then every once in a while you have grease or pickle juice on you, and you have to deal with that. And
Yeah.
so there was, for what it was a stinky, underpaid I was always tired and smelled like grease and pickles. But many years later, looking back, it was a tremendous learning experience just on all those things. I always tell people, you ever walk into a restaurant, I mean, not a restaurant, retail, anything, like say it's an ice cream store or a flower, whatever it is, any sort of store. You walk in and there's somebody possibly reading something on their phone or texting or whatever, but they're kind of leaning there like, and you're like, I've never been here before. And they're like, okay. And they're not really excited either way.
Yeah.
That person is an employee there and they don't really care. If you walk into a place and they're like, hey, how's it going? Hey, I haven't had, you're like, do you own this place? Yes, I do. Well, because they understand that value because it's their business. And as you hire people and it's not a good culture fit, as you just described, and I always tell people, like, I know I'm not here to impress you. I'm here to do business, and you're bored by that, but you are supposed to sort of be helpful,
Yeah.
So yeah, all the things you just said, I think it's part of, and it doesn't require that you be a family, but it does require that you understand that, uh, you're all in this together, if you will, or you all have an oar to row with, or whatever. And so it is a team, and so it isn't always about
Yeah.
you. So it was a good learning experience back then.
And I think life in general, the analogy I like to use is like if you're going to create an amazing meal or let's call it a stew or something, it's like life is about like putting ingredients in at the right moment, having them, come together. And you see a lot of people when they skip these kind of defining moments of like you learning a skill, getting, humbled, going through even some pain and suffering, some loss, these type of things in life all kind of add to the ingredients that give you experience and wisdom throughout your life. And you see when people skip that, let's just say people who might have been born into wealth and been given access to that wealth too early, right? You see a lot of people spiral out. They have massive problems with addiction. I've seen, you look at, almost every child celebrity is dealing with the fact that they skipped so many stages, and it's just not natural for a human being to have that much attention and that much wealth and that much power and that much influence at such a young age before they've developed the ability. And then you look at these people who kind of progressively through life have kind of gone through things, learned things, worked at that McDonald's for a little bit of time, then went to college, earned a degree. For me, my college was getting on the road and traveling coast to coast and throughout Canada and some international and getting exposed to all these different cultures and these people and these different ideologies that those type of things you just kind of absorb through life. And I'm actually very grateful that in my early 20s my band didn't blow up and we become this huge massive success, because I really honestly believe that could have killed me, without the life experience and learning the discipline that you need to go throughout life. So you hear that term midlife crisis all the time, where it particularly happens a lot in men, where you get into this certain place of your life and you look back and you realize like you're unhappy or something's missing, your physiology is changing, and so you completely disrupt your life and blow the whole thing apart. I've witnessed that. I'm turning 40 this year, so but because of the stages and progression of my life, like I'm at that point where I actually understand it. But if I hadn't got all of those ingredients and had the experiences that I had, I probably follow a very similar path. So I completely agree. I say all that to say I completely agree with you that those experiences in life are vitally important to making you a delicious soup.
Yeah.
You know.
I was given the chance to skip a few grades, and my parents said, "Do you want to go? 2 or 3 year, whatever it was. It wasn't just 1 year. I think it was 2 or 3." And I said, "Then I'm gonna be like a kid without a driver's license in a room full of people that are going off to college soon, right? I'll be just thrown off." And I didn't see the value, because I used to learn. I was kind of self motivated to. So I'm like, what am I really going to get? I'm just going to be socially awkward, not learning anything. so sort of a dramatically scaled down version of the celebrity thing where you're so taken out of a normal timeline and
Well,
then all the other stuff.
that was incredible wisdom because I had a friend who um that they weren't really given the opportunity. They came from a first generation immigrant family who, hey, you're advanced, so you're going to go into the advanced program, because it was very pressure from the family to be successful, right?
Sure.
So in third grade, so 8 years old, they skipped 2 grades, so they went from third to fifth, and then they were too advanced for that. So then they went from fifth to eighth. So they were a fourth grader in ninth grade. Sorry, fifth grader in ninth grade.
Sure.
And they they told me that before that experience, they had a big friend group. They would play every day. They were kind of the leader of their group and the most courageous. In fact, I remembered that they were the only person that could go off the high dive. And then all of a sudden, they're this weird smart kid with a bunch of older kids, and they're getting, And so later on in life, this friend of mine had severe social anxiety, and very awkward in social situations. And then they they said, well, I don't think I was meant to be introverted or meant to be so have this social anxiety. I think I developed it in that kind of traumatic experience at a young age. So it's like when kids are developing, it's not just about how smart they are or academics. And for you to avoid that pitfall that I think a lot of children fall into, that's wisdom beyond your years for sure.
Well, I did. So when I was in third grade, we had team teachers, Rika Raker, Debbie Reeker, Lori Raker. Uh, so Miss Reeker, she recognized my. Oops, sorry, I bumped into the microphone. Is anybody? She recognized that I was bored, so I moved into a seventh grade science class. So it was just like a little taste, and they didn't even know how old I was. So they were just like, some quiet kid. I don't know. So I was doing hands on, the typical hydrogen gas explosion and blow into the lime water and it turns foggy and a little bit. Here's how photochemicals work. So we developed some pictures. So just your basic junior high school level science. But I was only I was 4 years younger than them. So they would cheat on me sometimes, or cheat off of me, I should say, cheat off of my tests and stuff. And they're like, I can't believe you're only what is third grade, like 8, 9 or something? Yeah, eight or 9.
The third grade is 8
Yeah.
usually.
So so they were, they would kind of give me a hard time sometimes, but mostly they would interact with me like a normal person. But to me, that I was like, I don't know anything about what they do though. They talk to me like a normal person, but I have no, like, we don't hang out. It's not like I was a part of their social group. We had to find interaction in school, in the classroom. But I just didn't feel like I was a part of what was going on. So I think that little taste was enough to, I think, lead to what you described as wisdom. But I'll just say I was observing what was probably going to be the case. So,
Yeah.
whatever it is. But and that it's sort of like the getting the onboarding part of Zappos you described, where you kind of have a month to figure out what's going on. That's both sides should be doing that, right? Like, is this going to work?
Yeah. I mean,
Or,
that's what we would always tell people. We would say, hey, look, our values very well may not be your values. It doesn't make your values wrong. We're not here to judge each other's values. We're just saying, here's what we expect for you to be a culture fit within this company. These are the set of values that we live by and that we want to embody as much as we possibly can. And if you operate outside of these values, we're going to check you on that and we may fire you for that. So we want to show you what those are, be completely transparent. In fact, we pay people $2,000 in that first 30 days. We would make them an offer to say, if this isn't working for you, we don't want you to be here for the money. We want to provide you with the opportunity to go find something else. And so I thought all of that was a really good, method to make sure that the right people came in, the right people stayed, and they weren't just there for a paycheck. I apologize. Can you hear my dog in the background?
a little bit. That's okay.
Okay. My
Dogs are.
landscaper's outside now, so that's her arch nemesis.
Ah,
So her name's Petunia. She's a teacup Shih Tzu Yorkie mix. And for anybody that's a dog fan, she's a
nice.
rescue, and
Cool.
she thinks she can take on the leaf blower and win
Oh yes.
in her
Small
little 7-pound body.
small dogs are small dogs are always bigger on the inside. So
Yeah. And that's, that's funny when I'm walking her at the park, a big dog will, be very playful, and the owner will say, "Oh, they're friendly." I'm like, "It's the little one that starts it." It's,
always.
it's the little one that starts it, and then, you can't blame the larger dog for reacting. So I always tell him, "Nah, you know, my dog, she's friendly, but, I just don't know. I'd rather not have an altercation happen."
Yeah. Well, when you see two feisty alphas nose to nose, and you're like, what's going to happen here? It's always better to not find out, I think.
Yeah.
Uh, so I was going to mention the Ireland thing, which is a nice segue to the downtown project timeframe. So I moved to Vegas. I mentioned the house fire at some point. I've certainly mentioned it before in other shows, but so I moved here in August of 2013. I barely knew what was going on. I went to the downtown podcast in November, met all the characters there, and then got a job offer to work for Intel.
The
I was the
downtown
only
the downtown podcast was with Dylan Jorgensen, right?
Yep, and Jackie and Susan at the time, Suze Hinton. Pavel was the sort of the camera guy plus
Oh yeah,
everything
Pavel. I
else. Yeah,
remember Pavel. Yeah, what a
presently
cast.
presently
Those
in
were a lot
Canada.
of fun. I was on one of those, and I think I had a fire staff, if I remember right.
Hmm.
Uh,
I worked the camera at one point, and I said, "Oh yeah, I used to have a podcast thing." So that kind of got me into the conversational circle, I suppose. But so I got this job for Intel started in February of 2014, and I always tell people that led me, because I was always hanging around downtown. I'm like, "Oh, what's going on here? What's?" And I applied at Zappos, of course, and later I will tell you what Sean Looker told me when I met him. Uh, but I got this job in February, and right around now, I was on a plane to Ireland, and I didn't even have a return because I wasn't even sure. I just had to go to Ireland and work with our team in Ireland, and it was awful, torturous. Hanging out in Dublin and meeting a whole bunch of people from all around the world and whatnot, kind of like Vegas,
what a
except
terrible
yeah,
experience, right?
exactly. Yeah, I get
Go
paid for
hang
this.
out and go hang out in Dublin and
Yeah.
meet amazing people.
But here's the thing: I had never lived in Vegas before, so my first introduction to this it's right around now, right? April, May. So I can't remember the exact day, but it was April departure, and I came back in May. And when I arrived in Dublin, I was still coughing, and I was coughing for a good week or two. I lost my voice, and I will never forget. Grania Miller was the kind of the office manager. I was sitting behind her, kind of temporarily, and she's like, "Dan, we were out there singing last night." And too much singing, were you? Like, no, or actually, no, I don't have a voice. But they were kind of making fun of me. But I was coughing up a storm for at least a week there, and it was all Vegas whatever that I brought with me apparently. And
Wow,
so
yeah. People don't
so
really realize that there's so much like kind of dust in our air here that Vegas is a pretty brutal allergy town.
oh yeah,
Even with the lack of greenery here, it's like and flowers, it carries so much stuff just floating around in this dusty air that it blows people up that have allergies.
sure. Oh, I mean, it's kind of a shocker, and people. Some luckily, I don't have the tearing eyes and the sneezing, the sinuses and whatnot so much. A little bit, but it's mostly if the sinuses are going backwards. I guess I get my voice is all messed up, like it's kind of now today. But the Ireland thing is interesting because that was basically I had just arrived here and I saw what the downtown project was sort of blossoming into because it was 2014. And then I was whisked away every weekend almost to go, France, Rome, Dublin. I was in Dublin like 15 times, I think. It was horrible. And so I always say I was a spectator here, but I got to see a lot of innovation because I worked at Intel and the innovator in the was it Maker Innovator Group. So I went to Maker Fairs. I was at 47 hackathons. I was working with kids of all ages, and I always tell people when you're at a hackathon and 100 people show up and they want to stay awake for 48 hours, which I could also do at the time, and I probably could now. That's a weird setting when you start talking about innovation and culture of entrepreneurialism, right? Like doing stuff just because you want to do it, or I have to solve a problem, I'll do it in 48 hours with 3 of my friends.
Mm-hmm.
So I learned. I mean, I kind of already was familiar with that, but being so diversely, witnessing it so diversely, right, around the country and in Europe a couple times here and there, it really was interesting to see what was possible when you had a bunch of people actually interested in, moving whatever it was, moving the ball forward. But it could be, and my go-to story is Penn Apps, 12 to 1,500 students every semester, and somebody turned a ukulele into a drone controller, and they would play chords on the ukulele, and the drone would go through its stunts. So, ukulele controller for a drone.
Oh, wow.
Why not? You got a weekend. Might as
It
well.
sounds like something that you'd see at Burning Man for sure.
Yeah. Well,
Just
this was
like,
in Pennsylvania, but sure.
yeah, you come across these just people are just, hey, I want to make this thing do this, and then people can play with it,
Yeah, and that was the fun part, right? Some people had recycle sorters, or well, the list of projects is endless, but it was really interesting. And I would always come back to Vegas, and I would I'd have these stories, and of course we had our Intel Edison was our big rock star product. So Suze and Sean Looker both wanted one of those, but I did. So when I met Sean Looker, I was going to say I met him at Work in Progress. There was some event going on, and I said, "Oh, hey, I submitted my resume to Zappos, but I got you're not a culture fit." And he's like, "Did they even bring you in?" And I said, "No, I just got an email." And I had been talking to him for a little bit, and he's like, "I would have hired you right now."
Weird.
I said, well, he was visibly annoyed that the process maybe didn't work out that time, and then he moved on to Tennessee shortly after that.
That's
Where he is
strange
now.
that they said you weren't a culture fit prior. Did somebody know you there or something?
Um, it's hard to say because I was around, but not living. I was a spectator, like I said, so I was certainly around at the podcast and the dinners at Work in Progress and Gold Spike, and so I would talk to people. And it was always this, I work at Intel. I'm the only Intel employee here. I was the Intel guy often. Um, so a lot of people were interested in my tales of travels and excitement. But I don't know if anybody at Zappos was like, that guy's never going to fit in here. But that's what happened apparently. So, or
Man,
something. Yeah.
yeah. It sounds like that should have. It sounds like that was the case, because how could they understand that you're not a culture fit without interviewing you?
Well, they didn't interview me, so I guess not.
That's what I'm saying.
Some
Yeah.
some shuttle driver somewhere. But to that
You
point,
got
I've talked to Uber and Lyft drivers all around the world. They're totally interesting stories that everybody has a different take on. But yeah, so I have to imagine that someone felt I had not been working at Intel yet, so everything I said sort of comes later. But yeah, I was getting to know people. The common thing, and this is not supposed to be about me so much, but the common one was so I moved. You moved here from Silicon Valley. You moved from Silicon Valley to Las Vegas. And I said, yeah. Well, I had a house fire, and now you work at Intel. Eventually, like, yeah. And you're the only. There's no Intel. You're the only Intel employee. And right around the same time, there was an article about the sources of the talent for the Bay Area, and it was Berkeley, Stanford, and Harvey Mudd College, which I was like, that's wacko, because Harvey Mudd has 118 graduates every year. That's a drop in the bucket. But I happen to have gone there, so so for some reason, I attained some level of notoriety after I started working with Intel. But before that, I can't tell you. I would have been probably at Zappos just because it was kind of the place to check out. Maybe that's why I
yeah.
was not a culture fit. I don't know, but yeah, I did apply, so that's the way it is.
Bummer.
Well, here we are though. We have gotten to where we were supposed to either way.
Yeah.
So, but I really don't have on the ground. Like I was a spectator, so the downtown project will come up. In fact, we'll talk about it later before we end. But like, what was your involvement with downtown project day to day, insofar as you were still a Zappos employee and not like a downtown project employee? I think.
Yeah.
Is that correct?
So yeah, what happened when we decided to move Zappos to downtown and renovate and take over the new city hall? that was a piece of the puzzle, right? So um, when Tony sold Zappos to Amazon, uh, I believe this is accurate, but he basically sold it to Amazon all upfront in stock for 1.2 billion. So pretty good, amazing deal. Technically, if you do the math, they paid more for us than they did Whole Foods because as a stock acquisition, we did 1.2 billion when the stock was, I think, like 50 to $70 a share. Of course, Tony owned a large percentage, so he got a major windfall from that deal. And in fact, his windfall between when they agreed to sell to when they signed the documents um, was a lot. And so he decided, he was hanging out downtown. He was hanging out at the downtown cocktail room,
Yep.
which at the time, was kind of the spot, and he recognized that downtown was really cool because the bar owners all knew each other. And instead of being competitive, they'd be like, oh, you got to go check out this place. You got to go check out this place. So he would bounce around and he made friends. And so he wanted to, it was largely at that time, anything east of Las Vegas Boulevard and Fremont. So if you took Fremont Street further east in the Fremont East Historic District, it was pretty sketchy. Lots of, prostitution, gang activity, violence. It was a place even for me because I came up in the music scene. And so we play places like the Bunkhouse and Beauty Bar. I'm a 6'1" bearded guy, 200 plus pounds. And I was kind of like, man, this is a little bit of a sketchy area. I'm not sure if I want to be down here. Well, he decided to take a big bet and wanted to, and what's super interesting about the downtown project is, this is one thing I know about Tony, and it's one thing I loved about him, and I continue to love about him is if there was a specific way you were supposed to do something, like let's consort with an expert and say, how do we want to invest a big chunk of money into this area of town? The first thing they would tell you is, hey, why don't you under the radar, because it's very much a low property values at the moment, create a bunch of shell corporations and buy up the land silently. No, what he did instead was say, hey, I'm going to invest $350 million in the downtown and shout it from the rooftops. So 100 million of that is going to be in 50 million is going to be in tech startups. 50 million is going to be into, I might be getting these numbers a little off as a while ago. Maybe it's 100 million is going to be into bars and restaurants and small businesses. And the rest is going to be in just buying up real estate. Well, you can imagine that's not the smartest thing to do, which is tell everybody up front that you're going to spend this crazy amount of money in a specific area. That's what he did. It created a lot of hype. Obviously, it attracted some of the right people. Full transparency. I think it attracted a lot of the wrong people, and because it wasn't done from this like strategic behind the scenes, let's get the landscape done correctly and then do what we want to do. But that's kind of where I came into the picture. Is 2013. I still worked at Zappos. I was beginning to build a close relationship with Tony. And part of that was, hey, I was hanging out a lot downtown. In fact, at the time, I still played music. So we played a lot of music in downtown Las Vegas. There was so much programming going on at that time when it came to parades and events and takeovers of the downtown area.
Right.
And, so I just became very embedded in the community. And so then what happened is when we moved Zappos downtown into the old city hall, there was a role created at Zappos called head of community. And at the time, a gentleman at Zappos who had been there, 18 years, helped build Zappos from the ground up. Really, his name is Lauren Becker. he took over that he took that position. So he actually stepped down from a much higher paid compensated position to come in and work the community position. Well, eventually that part of the company fell within my department, you could call it. As that I don't want to open this rabbit hole or go down the rabbit hole of self-organization, but basically we had these circles, and the community fell within that, my circle. And so uh, I started just really viewing Zappos's role inside the community as we're here to help build resiliency, invest in, and spend money in the community, uh, support nonprofits, not from just a monetary perspective, but help them become self-sufficient. So, an example of that would be, um, the Downtown Vegas Alliance, which I'm currently helping. Instead of just cutting them a check, what we would say is for every new member, let's say a new membership costs $750, we will donate that amount of money to a charity of your choice. So if you want to become a member, so we basically would try to partner with nonprofits in a way that would help them grow resiliency, make connections, mentor them out of just relying on us for a check, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Because we knew, maybe someday Zappos isn't here. Maybe some other business comes along and nobody buys shoes online anymore. Nobody wears shoes. So that was a really fun part of my role within downtown. So between 2014 to 2020, largely my role was to understand the landscape, support the players, and be somewhat of just a investor into the community as much as I possibly could get away with. And we did a lot of that. So if we're doing a mixer, or we're hosting a candidate, or we're hosting brands, we would take them all through downtown. We would show them how amazing downtown was. I would take them on what I call the rabbit hole tour. So we'd start at like Mob Museum, underground in their speakeasy, and then from there we would go to, the downtown cocktail room, and then we would go to Container Park, and they would do the Fire and the Mantis, and then we'd go to Oak and Ivy, and then we'd go to Bin 702, and then we would go to Atomic, and then we would end at the trailer park. And for those of you who don't know all of this, it's the trailer park was this wild place where there was an alpaca living there, and Burning Man art, and it was a fireplace and community with tiny houses and airstreams. And I know all this sounds just crazy, but that was the reality of it. And yeah, so that was my role. My perspective was, yes, I did work for Zappos, but I had one of my focuses with my group was the Las Vegas community.
That's was the alpaca bartending by any chance? I thought I heard about that one time. That would be crazy.
I never knew the alpaca to bartend. I knew him to, his name was Marley. He would spit on people and behave badly most of the time. And I take full responsibility for that. We never would have had the alpaca. There was mixed emotions of Marley. But I'll tell you the backstory there. So we had a lady that would source a llama named Cusco for Zappos events. We'd hire Cusco to come out all the time because we just loved llamas. I like to think of llamas as like the Napoleon Dynamite of the animal kingdom. They're just kind of goofy and funny, and they have all these interesting facts about them. Like their blood is like, at one point they thought that their blood could cure COVID. They have like these high immune systems. Anyway, the lady would also bring this smaller alpaca named Marley. He's this little black alpaca. And one time she tells me, hey, Marley's not pulling his weight. I can't make enough money off of him, so we're going to get rid of him. I'm like, well, what does that mean? She's like, well, we just, whatever happens. And so I said, well, could we adopt Marley so that he doesn't go to, like, I don't know, alpaca grinder? I don't know what she meant by that.
Right.
And she's like, yeah, you can have him. You just, you need to build him a shelter and do all these things. So we did. So I went to Tony at the Airstream Village and said, well, why don't we adopt this alpaca? And when he first came, he was so kind and cute, and then he turned into kind of, when he became a teenager, he turned into a monster. And so I take full responsibility. I brought that and presented that to Tony, and of course he agreed. So, but now Marley, he's at an alpaca farm. He's living his best life. So the story ends happily ever after.
Well, in case anybody was wondering, because I have to be honest, I think I might have seen Marley. I never actually interacted, or I was never spit on. But certainly it became legend that the alpaca would kind of run the place.
Oh
So
yeah,
maybe
or run
more
you out of the place,
yeah, more of a bouncer than a bartender. But pardon me. But yeah, I mean, because you were there. So I've found in my travels, and one of the reasons we'll get to the retrospective towards the end, but I have a few more things before that. But one of the things that I think will be interesting when we do kind of take this wander down memory lane for hopefully a lot of people is that everybody has a different experience. It's the classic describing the elephant, right?
Yeah.
Like who saw what. As a spectator, I saw some things. I certainly talked to a lot of people. You were right in the thick of it,
Mm-hmm.
handing out alpaca shelters and whatnot. But everybody will have a different take home. And some people were not in the tech scene, and yet there was still a place for them there. There was a kind of a, from my view, and I'm sure we'll hear about this. There was I'm not a level playing field, but certainly the rising tide notion, right? Like come and start your dream or your vision or your journey or your startup or whatever you want to call it, and you'd have camaraderie and you'd have a sense of community and all that. So to me, looking in from where I was, and you can correct any of this if it's with your view, but it just seemed like it was, and I think this is where people get into like, oh, it was a big socialism experiment or it was a big commune, and you're like, well, I didn't really see it that way from the outside, but it was definitely a place that was supposed to be sort of an incubator of ideas, regardless of whether it was going to be the next unicorn app. It was more about the ideas and not the potential, I guess. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think there was so much stuff happening all simultaneously. One of the things we'd say a lot at Zappos, when it comes to ideas and entrepreneurialism, is try a lot of things, even things that may not make sense. They call it the shotgun approach. And then from those, let the ones that are going to fail fast. And the ones that start to kind of build a little bit of steam rise to the surface. And then they would say the second phase is cannonball, cannonball those ones that go, which you think in retrospect, it's kind of harsh, right? Because, you're a lot of things are not going to work. And I think that was one of the things that a lot of people, unfortunately, and again, this is my perspective. Everybody has their own perspective on this. Unfortunately, people really, and it's human nature, get really attached to their idea,
Oh yeah.
and it's their baby, and it's really hard to let your baby die, right? Even I hear a lot of people who are authors or even comedians, and it's like they produce a ton of material and then they go about killing their babies. Such a weird thing to say, but that's essentially what you have to get good at doing in that space. And I think that was one of the most difficult things, where you did come in, you built these phenomenal relationships, you were close to people. So when something didn't work out, it just felt really bad for people, because it's not just a business relationship. This is a personal relationship that you have. And so, that first round of layoffs that happened at DTP, I was actually in the office with Tony at that time, and these were his friends that were getting pulled into a room and saying, hey, we're letting you go. This particular, part of DTP isn't working. We're kind of heading into that second phase of doubling down on what's working and what's not. So immediately they're texting Tony, like, how could you do this? Yeah, I thought we were friends. I thought, And I remember how emotionally charged that day was for him. It really upset him, and the way people responded to being let go, or their business not getting a second round of investment. Well, how come this business got a second round of investment and we didn't? There was a lot of that, like, why did is this one just because they're better friends with you? Because it doesn't seem like they're performing more. Like,
Right.
how are these decisions made, right? um Gosh, that was a difficult time period, because the very beginning of it, it's all great, right? It's all positive, everybody's really loving everything. But in all startup in realms, that not every idea is going to be a success. And when things are being handed out, so just like, cool, you got an idea, let's do it. you know he's walking around downtown. There's this one story that I think is relevant, where there was a Zappos employee. He was known as Big Ernie,
Yep. Barbecue.
and barbecue, yeah. And Tony and Fred, kind of Zappos's number two at the time, they were walking downtown, and Big Ernie was sitting in his truck and saw them walking, and he's like, I just have to talk to him about how passionate I am about barbecue. So he just comes up to them and says, "Hey, I really want to do a barbecue place." So Tony says, "Okay, well, we're building this huge container park here, and I think that people are going to need to get fed. So pop up a tent, and every day bring your barbecue out here and sell your barbecue. And if you do well, we'll make you a barbecue place inside of Container Park." And you know, so that's how things were happening, right? It's like, there's not this huge process of, like, there was a portal online that you could go in and put, get some FaceTime, but so many of these things were also happening just through random collisions, which is one of the C's, and those connections would get built, and so knew someone else, and then those things began to build. And so I think inside of that, a lot of chaos is happening, and
Sure.
also a lot of feelings are getting hurt. Why did their idea get picked? My idea not get picked? I heard a lot of people, because I was, in the inner circle, talk about us like, "Oh, you're a bubble. If you're not late night hanging out in the trailer park with Tony, you're not getting opportunities."
Sure. Sure. How many people started drinking Fernet because of
Yeah.
hanging out downtown? Right.
Well, I'll say this: the first time I ever tried Farnet, I loved it, but I don't anymore. It actually was something I loved at first, and then over time, having some bad reactions to it over time, my
Sure.
my body was like, "No more of this stuff, please."
That happened to me with Dr. Pepper.
Oh, really?
We in college we had a drinking game, 101 shots. So at some point they said we need to have more non-drinking games, and my still to this day one of my friends, Dave Stepp, he's out there somewhere. He's like, "Can we have money for Pepper Fest?" What's that? It's going to just be Dr. Pepper all night. So I had 118 shots of Dr. Pepper, and I've never had it since.
Jeez.
It's awful.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. Well, I think that's what happened to me,
Yeah,
is
yeah,
I just want, one or two nights where I took it too far, and then all of a sudden I'm like, "Oh my gosh, just the thought of Fernet now kind of makes me go, oh, I can drink it now." But I I don't very often at all.
sure. But to your point in general, though, because I witnessed that too, just as a spectator. Again, I never was a part of any even a company downtown. I was always looking in and then heading out of town. But I did. People would tell me that that I, I thought there was going to be this when I got here. There was always this sense of like I'm not really sure how to do this, and I don't know if anybody can tell me how here. So there was, as you say, a lot of chaos, and different people had different experiences arriving here, expectations, and then really it kind of supports my contention that a workplace family, you can't lay off your kids, right? So that analogy breaks down pretty quickly when things go south. I think, my opinion.
Oh yeah. Yeah. And I'll be the first one to say, I think people that thought that were accurate. it was something that if you're, late night around the fire, hanging out, all these people are coming in and out. It was a seat at the table and it was a seat of opportunity. So much of my progression at Zappos, um, you know, I did show up. I worked as hard as I could, but I also had a seat at the table because I was very close friends with Tony. And being close friends with Tony meant opportunity was going to come your way often. And I had some female colleagues at Zappos that had children and they could no longer stay up late and hang out at the trailer park. And there was a moment where I got one of my Zappos. Again, it's a little different in how it's organized, but we did have circles within circles, right? So what happened when one of my lead link for my circle went on maternity leave is I got put over a larger circle and her circle got put inside of my circle. So I went from being, you know, somebody who was largely funded by and um, purpose driven through a person who you would consider in a normal structure, my boss. All of a sudden she came back from maternity leave and I was essentially her lead link. And, those are things that I look on back now in retrospect and go, wow, that wasn't the correct way in which that should have happened. But
Sure.
you're dealing with the chaos of self-organization and these complex adaptive systems that through governance can be changed. And I will say that wasn't Tony's decision necessarily. It was a just reorganization or restructuring. And at that time, because Zappos was operating on self-organization, there was reorganizations happening on the daily basis. So you could just
Sure.
imagine it's this almost like group of cells and they're emerging and they're duplicating and they're, all of these things are,
Interlinked.
yeah,
Interlinked.
yeah, exactly.
A little, yeah. We
Yeah.
2004, 2049.
Yeah.
Um, that is, yeah, that's fascinating. I'm sorry. Go ahead. I'm totally imagining what I'm going to say to this.
So, I, in retrospect, try to have not a defensive position on this, but really, here's what happened. Here's how we showed up in that space. We were having a really fun time. We were partying a lot. No idea was too crazy or too weird. It was like this really. I have a very fond memory of it. But I also, when I talk with people, it's like, well, how could somebody that is raising a family live downtown in that environment and hang, because really the ideas would start flowing later on in the evening as we were around the fire and drinks were getting passed around. I mean, it is what it was. And
Sure.
so I really do see that other side of it where, hey, you guys are a bubble. It's hard to penetrate that bubble. If we're not with you partying or part of that inner circle, um, how are we supposed to get a seat at the table?
Right.
And that was a reality. And I
Yeah.
won't for one second say that that wasn't the truth of what was happening. Now, I don't think it was. I know it wasn't from my perspective and from Tony's perspective on purpose. It,
Yeah, but perception is reality, right? So people see that and it impacts everything.
exactly. Yeah.
So
It,
the
it.
sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. No, I'd love to hear your response to that.
So I I have many jobs. I entered the workforce in 1993. It's been a long time. Uh, in fact, it'll be in July of this summer. It will be July 1993 when I first moved up to Silicon Valley from LA, where I went to college. And I always a lot of networking, a lot of resumes went from friend to friend, and it was very rare. There was no Monster or Hot Jobs, and now it's become Indeed and whatever else, LinkedIn, silliness. But it was always, you knew somebody and you got direct referrals and all that. And I usually had like a circle of friends, either working directly for them or with them, or tight intercompany comms. And So I always kind of felt as though I were in an inner circle, and things would fall in my direction more than they probably should have if there was no uh, friend factor involved. But I'll tell you that it was kind of an eye opener. I worked at a small company, and we were across the street from Great America in
Mm-hmm.
Santa Clara. So we would go ride the Top Gun and whatnot at lunchtime. It was good times. So we worked hard. We had a good time. It was pretty familial, not quite, but everybody got along. And I went. We knew there was some stuff coming up on the horizon, and I went with one of my friends with the corporate counsel. Ended up at the Tide House in Mountain View, and the corporate counsel said, "Hey, if you buy me a beer, I'll tell you who's getting laid off." And we did find out, and that was the worst decision ever. Because now you go back to work, and you're like, "Oh, now I know
Oh
things.
yeah.
That's horrible."
Yeah. You
And
see behind the curtain.
yeah, and obviously neither my friend nor I were laid off. So that's almost worse, right? You're like,
Yeah.
on
Survivor's
it.
guilt is real, man.
Oh,
It's
absolutely.
very real.
But the take home was that all of the well, obviously the family work thing was not quite working out, but the notion of like all for one for all, and all these things can be taken away so quickly that it's difficult if somebody's been through that once. If they get laid off after putting it, all the layoffs going on now, the Googlers that were there for a million years and then they're just laid off by email. These are the sorts of things that do real damage to people, and I can't imagine. And maybe as we look back in our downtown project retrospective, that's not a plug, I'm just referring to it, but
Hmm.
I would love to know how people what they took away, whether they're still here or not. But because some of the things you've described and some people's perceptions of it, I think will be materially interesting in the new Las Vegas, whatever it becomes in the near term. And some of these things are really about whether you're a part of it or whether you're left out. And I will tell you, some of the conversations have people being left out, right?
Yeah.
They're
Well,
going to be a tech startup boom here, if you believe some of the stories, and not everybody's a coder. Some people are in our thriving tourism industry. Our service industry is large. So
well, in one of my favorite quotes, it's actually a Maya Angelou quote. Actually, Tony gets quoted, like he quoted this, but it's a quote he repeated from Maya Angelou. And the quote goes, "People won't always remember what you did, but they will always remember the way you made them feel." Right? Those
sure,
feelings go so far past the actual facts, right? And I think that's something that should be taken into account inside of the future Vegas, if this does become like the number one vibrant tech hub. And I just saw the 2023 pre-IPO startup capitals. Vegas is number one.
I have that document. If you
Yeah,
want it, I'll forward it to you.
yeah. And what's interesting about that is we always would say this about Tony specifically, which was it seems like he's 10 years in the future. And like it's like he sees something and he goes for it. If you're lucky enough to be caught up in the halo effect of that kind of him making a decision, with the capital and the experience and the things that he has. But it was really early for Vegas, right? It
Sure,
was,
sure.
at the time I remember so much of what the ideas were. So let's just take the container park, right? The downtown project, the container park that's right there off of 7th and Fremont with the praying mantis out front that spews fire. Uh, that, and I don't know if this is the exact number, but it's something like this. I remember in order to get that built, Tony had to go in front of the city council personally, put a collared shirt on and ask for like 30 variances in building codes to happen because it was so far outside of what anything had been done in this city before. So those are the type of things where it was like we're blazing territory that's never been done, and there's no formula for this. Like the city understands, oh, we want to build casinos and maybe do some bottom retail slash restaurant space, high rise. That's the model. That's like, hey, bring more of those downtown, because that's how we know the revenue comes in. Where instead, Downtown Project is buying up casinos and taking the gaming out of them, right? Which reduces the amount of revenue that those places can make. So they're taking the revenue, sorry, the casino, the gambling out. I remember a huge campaign. I don't know if you remember when you'd walk along Fremont, there was these little, places where you could grab magazines out of, and it was for prostitutes. There were these little, I'm blanking out of the name, but basically there are these little magazine stands, and Downtown Project made a huge campaign to remove those, because one of the things that they wanted to see downtown become was a family friendly place, and one of the metrics that they would track was a stroller count and things of that nature. Like, can we actually change the very nature of what downtown is? And those were all things that were counterintuitive. It was met with a lot of resistance in a lot of different circles. And, I don't think those things would come up against the same roadblocks that they did then now. I think, we are in a completely different landscape. And largely, I do say, while it was imperfect and there's a lot of things that could have been done differently, that is due to the trailblazing of Tony Hsieh and Downtown Project.
Yeah, so I will counter slightly, because I agree with and I think the thing that's lost is that people will often refer to the Downtown Project as if it were a tech hub, but I always, looking back especially, I would view it more as an entrepreneurial hub, and hug, actually, when you think about it, because there were a lot of things in place. I've not asked anybody for the deals that they had and the arrangements and terms and whatnot, but you and I talked about this in person recently, that sometimes people had their housing as part of a deal, or there was a place to come and be entrepreneurial and live here.
Yep.
And you didn't have to be starting a tech startup. Sometimes it was starting a restaurant or a barbecue place or a bar or a retail outlet or other services. And so I think it would be incorrect for people to think that there was a massive surge of, Silicon Valley like tech development here. I think it was much more broadly spread around.
And what I witnessed happened several times was when the seed investment would come from the Vegas Tech Fund and a company, a tech startup out of that 50 million was successful. That second round of investment, where they got their second round, or they became, they actually were successful. What would happen is the new investors would require them to come live near them. So
Exactly.
a lot of the ones that were successful ended up moving out of Vegas.
Right.
And that was something I saw happen over and over. Was our city in total infrastructure wasn't attractive enough to keep a tech startup that was starting to thrive, because we didn't live in the world we live in now, which is, hey, you can work for us and you can live in another city. So there wasn't a huge pool of developers and technically minded people that were in the city at the time. Our city was really built on customer service,
Sure. Sure.
and the gaming space and the entertainment space. So it was a little bit like, I like to just say it was ahead of its time.
Yeah, but I also I, I think there has been a rush to focus on tech startups, and in fact, I will say there was a job description floating around for a global economic agency of some sort, maybe an alliance, maybe, and the job description, which I believe was pulled back a little bit. The concern of the individual would be metrics along the lines of startups, funding for startups, exits. It was very focused on a traditional tech startup, hyperscaling model. Get your AAB, whatever, hit it big, exit,
Mm-hmm.
score, unicorns, all the buzzwords. And to me, but the title was an entrepreneurial what was it, entrepreneur director or something? I don't know. Whatever. It was entrepreneurial, but it wasn't entrepreneurs. It was tech startups. It was people in a particular area. And if that the intimation could be, and I always tell people, see how we're sitting in this coffee shop having this conversation? The entrepreneur that started this is right over there.
Yeah.
And so there's this tendency to believe that entrepreneurialism equals tech startup, and in fact, that's mostly not true. And I have to wonder, having read through that report, and if you've not, I will forward it to you. Um, and they list their methodology and what they were measuring, and specifically, and how they got the data and all that. So it's not like a magic headline number. You can actually see where they got it. But the question I would ask is, what happens next? Go ahead.
Yeah. So I think that if a city is focused on tech specific startups, they're being very short sighted, because if you think about where tech is heading right now, where humanity, let's just zoom it out from a global perspective. With what's happening with AI right now, machine learning, robotics, automation, quantum computing, when those things begin to converge, um, okay, so what then will a city be responsible for? Right? It's not going to be a bunch of people that understand how to code stuff and do these types of things. The way that we exist, we're on the precipice of a very large shift in what it means to be a human being and show up inside of a community, right? I believe that a really healthy outlook on a city should be focused on how do we come to a place where human beings can live holistically and balanced and self-actualize and contribute human being, quality outputs that bring them, fulfillment, joy, happiness. Where are we going to be the platform for human beings to exist? Which is why I really like where Las Vegas is poised, because the fact that we're shifting from just being a gaming town, tourist town, to a hub of entertainment, I think is a very good thing, because I am a believer that we're not going to have to show up inside of the next, 10, 15, 20 years and do the same type of work that we've been doing. Similar to the factory model, when we were dealing with the Industrial Revolution, like the reason that hierarchical systems exist where you managed a person was because that person had to show in and clock up and do a shitty thing for 8 to 10 hours a day, something that nobody wanted to do, but they got a paycheck and that got managed, right?
Sure.
Well, now we live in a world where it's, now somebody, I mean, I think it's actually kind of, people would disagree with me on this, but it feels a little inhumane that somebody is sitting on a line in a warehouse somewhere, taping boxes for 10 hours a day, and sometimes peeing in, a water bottle. Like, haven't we moved past that, where that's not what we need from humans anymore? And I know I'm ranting right now, but I think that I do think we're moving into this space where I believe that technically, really powerfully technically minded people are going to become essentially both the babysitters and the fighters against technology, if that makes any sense. It's
Yeah.
like, and so if you have a hub where people can be healthy and holistic and tend to the way technology is going to behave in the future in a way that benefits and uplifts the human experience, I think those cities are going to really thrive. I think, and Vegas is poised to be that, because we are beginning to attract, and be looked at as a tech hub. But I really think from a city perspective and from a community perspective, we should be looking, where are these things heading? Because the whole landscape is changing. So that's my rant. I'd love to hear your response to that.
Yeah, the reason I laughed is because I don't know about ranting. We're advocating. We're advocating on behalf of where we live. Um, I so I will say straight out, I believe it is a bad idea to say we are going to be the next Silicon Valley, and you haven't said that, so I'm not
I
speaking to you
agree.
specifically. But I think, and the mantra I've been chanting a little bit louder now and then is, being Silicon Valley has been done. Why don't we be better Las Vegas? So that's kind of I'm the managing director of the Innovate for Vegas Foundation. It's a 501c3 charity. We're working on civic volunteer projects to make our smart city smarter. It's like I've prepared that before. I've said that before, but making a better Las Vegas really is what that entails. And I'm trying to drive local innovation by local innovators. I got a million of them. I can talk all day in these little tropes, but the take home really is, um, in fact, we used to be Code for Vegas, and Sean Looker was the original co-founder of that. He's on our board, so we're keeping the band together a little bit. But right away, it was, well, I'm not a coder, so I'm not welcome here. And I said, no, that's not true. So we have instituted a name change, which is more paperwork than it should be, but so whatever. But so Innovate for Vegas came from Code for Vegas because Code for Vegas was literally off-putting. I heard that in so many words.
Hmm.
So Innovate, it fits nicely. Innovation District, Innovation Center, Innovate.Vegas is the website for that stuff. So innovating for our city kind of puts a little spin on that, right? Like we're actually looking within. And I have found, and so we have Code for Vegas and Create for Vegas are two, I call them the two entrances to the same dining room. If you've ever seen a Kentucky Fried Chicken and a Taco Bell,
Yeah.
same owner. So you can be creative and or technical or both or learn or whatever, but it's we can all work on projects that are ultimately beneficial. But not everything is going to be a tech startup, right? So the Create for angle is literally like there's still a lot of things that are not sitting at a laptop and coding all day. There's talking to people, it's figuring out what works and what doesn't. What did we just release, and does it work for you? Does it fix the problem we were trying to? Can we translate that into other languages? And my favorite example is our transit system here only does English and Spanish. And I personally help people all the time that speak Polish, Japanese, German. There was somebody from Sweden, although she spoke English pretty well, but just helping them out with getting how to get the directions to get from here to there. Um, so there's an entire engagement with the rest of the world, and 40 to 50 million of them visit here every year, that you would think we would be able to make the most of, other than go to that stadium or that resort and spend much money, right? So they're here.
Mm-hmm.
There's plenty of opportunities to learn and teach and share and all that with, and I'm not diminishing that by saying that, but there's all these people that are here. And like I always tell people, go to Area 15. That place is cool. The Omega Mart is very different from most of the things you will encounter here. So it's kind of fun, kind of mostly family friendly. But I think the word on the street that I keep hearing too often is, well, we need to get the startups here. We'll have companies move here, bring their employees, and we'll start getting more capital. We'll get B round and later. We won't have people with strings pulling them back towards Santa or into Utah or Denver or other sources of money. And I have to question whether we should try to be that, or if we should try to, I mean, that could be a component, but is it something to celebrate when we are creating, well, okay, not everybody's going to have a startup that succeeds, right? It's still 80-20, give or take. It's 80-20. If you're if you're Y Combinator, if you're opening a restaurant, it's pretty much 80-20, right? 80% will fail. So what happens when we say, okay, we're gonna lean, we're gonna gentrify, we're gonna raise the cost of living, we're going to, now I'm ranting, see, and then we're going to put all the money on the 20% success rate of tech startups, and we'll hope for the best. Then what? So I'm just concerned that there's a lot of cheering and excitement, and it's sexy to talk about that stuff, but it's not necessarily thinking about everybody. It's, I'm not saying no child left behind, but there's not everybody's a coder. As I just described, some people are creators and not coders.
Well, one of the least sexiest things to talk about is the wealth floor. Everybody likes to talk about the wealth gap. And one of the most powerful things I think you can do inside of community and at the world at large is to actually just raise the poverty floor. So what is the floor inside of our city, right? What does the floor of poverty look like? And then how do you focus on that? It's like everybody wants to lure the new, big, sexy, whether it's it's a big group from California that's looking to relocate, or lure the Elon Musks of the world and negotiate this fantastic deal. It's like you have to give a lot away to lure those big groups, and I'm not saying that it's not valuable to lure them, but if you play the traditional game of, okay, let's raise and maximize the total value. Have you ever heard of the company called Maps?
With a Z or an S?
Oh, with an S. And
Oh,
so
no.
essentially, they're a company that's trying to legalize plant-based medicines and things like MDMA, specifically for the purpose of um, of doing therapy with people with PTSD and so on and so forth. So um, they've created this interesting structure. I was just reading about it the other day, where it's a nonprofit that governs a for-profit, but the for-profit's highest outcome is not measured by trying to maximize profits for shareholders. It's trying to maximize public good, right? So it's essentially this structure in which they can receive donations, they could seed funding from their nonprofit into the for-profit, and then that for-profit is essentially taxed, but it's also measured in success by the public good that it does. I actually think it's a really interesting model to perhaps try some things inside of community on, where I think the low income housing model needs to be changed. And I'm not an expert in this space. I feel like there's some ideas that I think we could explore around that. But I think that so often we like to look at and explore these sexy things like tech startups, and we ignore or just don't address the things like our poverty floor, things like homeless, low income housing, food insecurity, education, those foundational pieces inside a community, and not education of like, oh, let's get kids to graduate in the current system, but should it be revamped and re-looked at, because the tools are different, the landscape is different,
Sure,
the
sure.
outcome is going to be different. And I know there's a lot of amazing people working in all of these spaces inside of our community, but I also think that you know currently I am the director of the Downtown Vegas Alliance, and the number one, what do you think the number one thing that's talked about of our members is? I'd be curious what you think it is.
Well, probably having trouble hiring people, or is it the homeless people hanging around downtown?
Homeless,
Okay.
by
Well,
far.
so I will say, when I had the owners association for food trucks, and I met with one of the general managers of a large business downtown, one of the oldest businesses downtown, as soon as I said something about helping the homeless, it was like, "Oh no, we don't want this." No, and that kind of ended the conversation. So I guess it's a little bit. There's a lot of angst around this, apparently. Still,
It's arguably one of the most complicated and volatile issues that exist within community. Um, but it's something that you absolutely cannot ignore. And as a community, there has to be a plan. And I really believe that the plan, I've seen, one of the things that happened years ago is I kind of got asked by Tony, and this was outside of Downtown Project. This was outside of Zappos, just kind of friend to friend. He said, do you think you could explore the best solutions for solving the issue of homelessness within our community? So I kind of had this blank check to go do a lot of research and explore a lot of ideas. And I traveled to Seattle and San Francisco and Chicago and New York, and met with a ton of companies that were, you know, kind of really interesting, houseless communities that were self-organized, where land was annexed, and they kind of gave the population the ability to exist and live. And one of the most interesting programs that I saw was a program out of Oakland. And I don't know if this was a long term success, but it was really interesting what they were trying. And they called it pay the encampment. And what they would do is they would approach a large encampment and they'd say, kind of, how does your leadership work within this, and you'd be surprised. There's a hierarchy that exists. There is, people who take care of people and are kind of the de facto leaders inside of these communities. And they approach them and they say, hey, what we're going to do is we're going to pay you a certain amount each. And this is what we don't want to see. We don't want to see boom, boom, boom. You kind of go down your checklist of, as a community, we would not like to see these things show up inside of our community. So give them the opportunity to self-police. And then through that, once you've addressed the side that you're talking about it, which is the business owners who are fed up and frustrated and angry, then you begin to have a very good approach on plugging people into services, plugging people into housing vouchers, low-income housing, getting them, plugged into resources, etc., peer support groups. Anyway, so that was an interesting one because I'd never seen anybody else doing it that way. But in Oakland, they were trying that experiment. That's back in like 2017 timeframe.
Was Bambi Francisco still behind any of this, or?
I don't know.
Yeah.
I wasn't familiar with the particular politics or what was going on. I just remember we met with a group that was the strategy in which they were using.
I always refer. I was here when I attended the event at the Learning. What was it called? Learning Village.
Yeah.
It was a downtown lowdown, I guess, but she presented about what she was doing in Oakland to turn it into a startup city, and the 8 pillars, I think it was, of things to consider or develop. So she sounded like she was fairly progressive. There's a YouTube video of her talking, and I'm like, oh, I was like to the left of where this camera was. But it was a fascinating talk, and I know that they were trying. I don't know where Oakland is today, but I have to think, because I always tell people, if you want to be Silicon Valley, we need a time machine in Stanford. But if you look at where cities are today, the other trope is you can taste a piece of here's some cake. This cake is delightful. Now I know how to make it. Like, no, you just tasted the cake. I got to show you the recipe. Like, nope, I got it. Like, well, there's more to it than just the end part. You have to start and prepare and make it. No, so I'm concerned that there's a lot of energy behind. We'll just sprinkle some money on top and everything will be fine. And that's why I'm hoping. As we look back over just the conversation we've had here today, I'm hoping some people listening will say, oh yeah, that would be something to think about. But I'm hoping that there will be these discussions around, what did work, what didn't, all the things you've already said.
I have my brother-in-law in Anchorage, Alaska. He's been involved in housing and sheltering the homeless population up there for years. And one of the biggest things that they run into is people in politics leverage this issue for political power. It's a hot button inside a community. And so what I recognized with him, because he's the actual boots on the ground doing the work, like director of operations inside of these massive shelters where at one point he had about 1,000 people sheltered in the middle of winter in Anchorage, Alaska. So a pretty large operation. And what happens is they'll get something going that's working. They'll be taking care of the basic needs of a population of people, and then they will begin to start to plug people into services and get some success metrics around, like, so look, out of 1,000 we took 50 and plugged them into services and got them to a certain point. And but what happens is whenever there's a political change, right? Like, okay, let's say it's a Democratic council and you have a mayor that's conservative, and then all of a sudden they're at odds and the mayor puts their support behind this operation. Then all of a sudden the council is completely against it, right? It's like it inside of at least that community, and maybe that's not what will take place in inside of Vegas. But I think that there's certain things that have to be kind of pushed outside of like political lines and say, look, I think we can all agree that here's something that is good and beneficial for community, which is
Right.
instead of and we use the word homeless, but I would rather just use the word poverty and rather say, how can we raise the poverty floor inside of our community where we really focus on that piece of it and really agree that that is a nonpartisan issue that we should all be in support of. And what pieces of our prosperity or the money that we have coming into our community should we put towards that,
Sure.
and then get the right people and the right and make it a holistic thing. I'm a very optimistic and positive individual, and I am. It's not lost on me that this is arguably the most complicated and hardest issue inside of community to to approach and create effective change in. But I think we have to try. We have to try.
Yeah. I mean, it's very easy to forget humanity. I know nothing about being homeless, but for a moment on April 8th, 2013 at 2 in the morning, when my home was on fire, I was becoming temporarily homeless. And sometimes things happen, and the wrong time, the wrong situation, the wrong circumstance, everything can disappear instantaneously, and you are suddenly complete. And I would like to think I have things to contribute to the world, right? So someone who, through a series of events, circumstances out of their control or whatever, and they end up homeless. I was only homeless for 3 days. The Red Cross gives you a hotel, and so I wasn't homeless, but I was staying in a hotel. But I had no home. I was done. I was like, what am I going to do next? Uh, to think that there's and I always say the same thing with if you don't allow certain identity groups to participate in things, you're like, you're discounting a tremendous amount of value in your population by just saying, no, you're not allowed to do that. All the brilliant ideas and whatnot. So I think, and you and I have talked about our favorite economist, Mark Blythe, and the value to society of investing in people and what comes out of that down, a little bit down the road, which some people don't like. If it's more than a quarter away, they're like, why are we helping these people? But I can't help but wonder what would happen if people actually considered the bigger picture and the macro and the long term and the actual value proposition of not being so dismissive of other people just because they are not where you are. And so, like I said, I was only homeless very, very briefly and in the most gentle of circumstances, ultimately. But when everything has changed out from under you, or other people have other circumstances, they don't always want to be out there. Some people have different circumstances, but I think, it's too easy to just be dismissive because of your own interests. And that was the circumstance I described, where it was like, we don't want them on our sidewalk outside of the building. So we don't want to encourage anybody to stay. It's very cold, unfortunately.
Yeah. Well, it is a very difficult thing to forego your kind of human nature response to these things. There's two big things that I think are untrue in regards to how people approach this issue. And one is that this is a choice, that people
Right.
chose to be here in this space. I think if you had access to all the information of a person's life, you would know that nobody set out to be in a space where maybe they're wrapped up in addiction, or their mental health is at a low, or their chemical imbalances are off, and these types of things have brought them to this place. And secondly, the fact that you're not already paying for it, right? So that's the big piece of it, where if you really look at the socioeconomics of how we are paying for it, we're paying for it in very roundabout ways inside a community, which is if somebody's living in addiction and they're feeding an addiction, more than likely they're feeding that addiction with um, on the black market. Let's just say they're stealing. Let's say that's $100 a day drug habit. Well, that $100 a day drug habit, they have to steal $400 a day worth of stuff because to sell stuff, it's worth 25 cents on the dollar, right? And so
Sure.
how does a consumer pay for that? Well, loss prevention, insurance, that just all gets baked into the cost of goods. Now, the issue is nobody believes that if you did fix that problem and less things got stolen and less things need to be insured and loss prevention went down, nobody believes that, uh, the people inside of, let's just say it's a Walgreens, right? No, what people don't believe is that that's going to come back to us by prices coming down, right? They're like, they'll never give up the profit. Their profit margin will just go up. And that's like the evil part of capitalism, which is just about maximizing profits. Well, that's something that we have to look at as a society. We have to look at as, look, we can't ignore this. We have to come up with a holistic approach to this inside of our communities. And the misinterpretation that people have that they're not already paying a cost is it's just not true.
Right.
You're already paying for it. The people who you know are buying goods inside a community, they're paying their insurance premiums for access to medical care. It all comes to the consumer in a roundabout way. So that's just the truth.
Sure. And the funny part, you just described, that the current inflation that everybody has been experiencing for the last year. You start looking, inflation is inflation if profit margin hasn't remained where it's been the whole time, right? Like you're still making the same money on that. You just raise the prices and your profits, so you're still making the same percentage. So this happens, and the power of the marketplace could be, capitalism has some power that is entrusted to the shoppers. Just don't
Mm-hmm.
shop at Target. Shop at your local, local store, locally owned store. When I was living in Sunnyvale, I had Radio Sunnyvale, our podcast network. So I used to talk to people all the time. I went to the cold weather shelter in the winter, and I talked to the people that were staying there and how did they get there and what was their circumstance and whatnot. And they're like, nobody ever asked us any of these. So it was interesting to hear these stories. And at the same time, our blighted downtown improvement district, the mall was all boarded up and but they put in a Target. That's why I said Target. So they built a nice Target, nice big parking structure. Walk over there, go shopping. So the city had an opportunity to advertise on one of the digital billboards on the 101 freeway. So all the Silicon Valley commuters back and forth, they would see, not advertising the other small businesses in the blighted downtown to make sure that people know we're still open for business. You should come down and hang out at Murphy's and Fibber McGee's and eat at this restaurant. It was come to Target, and I thought that was very telling. But
Mm-hmm.
that's not how you connect people to their communities that you are talking about. It's how you connect people to the big business that sends the money away. And so that's one of my concerns with our ecosystem here, is whether we're going to focus on the target of tech startups and not the local business owners and the local entrepreneurs who maybe just don't want to exit. Maybe they want to just have
Mm-hmm.
a business, and they should be able to compete.
Well, I think the one of the most powerful things inside of my favorite communities that I visit is diversity. A diversity of thought, a diversity. I go outside of downtown Las Vegas, and you go to um, those large real estate master plan communities that all have kind of the same grocery store, Circuit City, Best Buy. That kind of hub, gas stations, restaurants, and it's all the chain stuff.
So you've been visiting Phoenix.
Well, look, there is a cookie cutter,
Yeah.
math thing that these large real estate developers have, and it works. But I think similar to the shopping mall, those things are at some point are going to be like so stale, and people are not going to want to live, play. The best downtowns and places like right now, like look at the Arts District, right? It's so awesome to see it just blossoming with so much diversity, right? And small business owners that are all putting their love and their skills inside of a bunch of small businesses. Um, and those are like my favorite types of communities. One of my favorite statistics is that in Manhattan, uh, there is only a 3-day food supply,
Hmm.
and there's no master food supply manager, right? It all happens through this network of thousands of food supply networks, from small markets to some larger ones. But there's this very complex adaptive system that supports the need of food. And I think that's one of the most beautiful things about uh, communities is you just really want that. You really want to have a space for small businesses to be that, and that be okay. Just
Right.
because something's working doesn't mean you have to scale it and plop one of those things everywhere.
Right. And I'm concerned because so for example, you mentioned the arts district. I haven't talked to anybody about this particular aspect since before the pandemic, but the discussions back then were that, yeah, it's getting expensive here. I got to move south. So some of the people that were in the arts district are now not in the arts district. And, that's sort of the way it is, I guess, sort of, except that, I mean, there has to be a little bit of transparency, right? There is a cost involved with modernity, and not everybody wins. And I frequently use this. I said, well, we do live in a city with many fewer winners than losers. That's how gambling works.
Well, it's the nerd in me likes to think about the story of Star Wars, right? Where the rebels become the empire becomes it's like this like circle of. This happens to so many artists I know when they really, they start out, it's the rebel cause, it's the loving it for the art and kind of a disdain for the system, and then all of a sudden, let's say they get popular, and then their art's the thing, and they make a lot of money, and they become the very thing in which they kind of set out to kind of come against in a way. And when you have, you know, the when you have kind of this cycle of when something becomes really cool, everybody wants in on it, right? They want a piece
Sure.
of it, and a area of town that's like, wow, that's the cool place to be. They have the best restaurants. The art's so cool. There's murals everywhere, and it's just got such an amazing vibe and diversity. People will begin to want to be there, and then it begins to automatically price people out of the neighborhood and price
Absolutely.
people out of the district. And I don't know what the solve is for that. I don't know if there is one. I would
Well,
like to think perhaps this idea that I don't know. I think that maybe there could be a new classification of a company that's its purpose is to have the public's best interest in mind, and
well,
produce for the public good. That's when I heard
yeah,
that maps
public good
that
corporation. Yeah, yeah,
yeah, that maps structure I thought was a
yeah.
really cool thing. So maybe if there is housing, and maybe there needs to be a certain percentage of low income housing that operates from that model. And so if you're
Well,
looking inside of a community, it's like we need to keep um, I was just up in Ketchum, Idaho, which is a very wealthy community. It's like a ski town. And I happened to meet up with at an event a woman. her name was Michelle, who runs a lot of essentially low income housing inside of that community. Because if you didn't have places that were reasonable rent, you wouldn't have people to run the ski lifts and run the restaurants and be
Right.
bartenders up there, because
Right.
nobody could afford. And they literally, in the season where all the rich people are up there in their mansions skiing, they have this huge amount of I wouldn't say huge, but they have a pretty large amount of housing available that's not at what the market could get, right?
Right.
So I thought that was a really interesting thing.
And
Where
that's I've mentioned Evelyn, one of my colleagues here. She's trying to look at housing to enable people to start businesses here, because you can't move in if you don't have a pay stubs and money in the bank. And it's similar to what you've just described, I think.
And yeah, and I think it would be really cool. I love the model of like where you live above your workspace, or you live above your restaurant, you live above your bar. Like
Sure.
that's a cool, kind of next phase. Um, I have to run because I do have a appointment, but I just wanted to see if we could wrap this up.
We can wrap this up. I was going to say I took a leadership Sunnyvale program in Sunnyvale. So just a couple of things. One, Silicon Valley became so expensive that the police and fire couldn't afford to live in the city, much less the people working in service industry. So there's a
Wow.
whole thing to consider here. If we lean so heavily into like tech startups on it, that we forget during the pandemic, rents went up by 40% and all that stuff. So all this stuff we can actually look at if we examine, and that's why we'll talk about the downtown project retrospective next time.
Okay.
But really, at the end of the day, engineering that I've been doing for so long is really about analyzing for failure analysis and trying to repair things before they break next time. And so I think really deep dives on how things work and maybe how they don't, so we can learn from and improve. And we may just end up teaching other people how to do it in other cities. So,
Yeah.
and 40 million people come here, so we can talk to them directly.
Yeah, I think that's one of the most powerful things about Vegas. I don't know about you, but since I've lived here, all my friends and my family have come to quote visit me. It's a great place to live because it is such a hub for people to come in here for vacation or entertainment. And having the fact that so many people come to this city, how powerful would it be? And I know that was one of the ideas for Downtown Project is, it's not hard to get somebody to come spend a week in Vegas, and hey, check out what we're doing, have a meeting here, let's build relationships. I've actually think that there's a huge opportunity, and you and I talked about this, I think, in person,
Yes.
for Vegas to be where businesses incorporate, because now that businesses, you can work from anywhere, it's like you do need to summit your employees. Well, what easier place that has more infrastructure, that has more venues and
Yeah.
ballrooms
Yeah.
and the ability to create events for you and your team. It's like, okay, incorporate here. Doesn't mean you actually have to work from here all the time, but like a period of time, summit your employees here, get together,
Sure.
have a conference, have whether it's quarterly or bi-yearly or once a
Yeah.
year, all hands. But it makes a lot of sense for companies to incorporate in Las Vegas, regardless of what you are. You don't have to be a tech startup, but now so many businesses are all over the country. But what better place to say, hey, we're incorporated in Las Vegas, and now when we want to get the employees together, you guys all come summit in Vegas.
And I
And
mentioned I mentioned I worked for Intel Sales and Marketing Conference every year. All the global sales and marketing people come to Vegas for a week, and then they go back to where they came from.
yep,
So you get all the business without any of the residential loads on the water and other resources. We
yep,
should lean into being a better Las Vegas. We are built for remote workers to come and do hackathons or innovation sprints right
hmm,
here. As you
yep.
say, we have all the stuff. So yeah, there's more to talk about, but this has been very interesting. I really appreciate your time, and we'll talk more about some of those things I wrote on your whiteboard soon.
Yeah.
And
Well,
that will
thanks for having me.
absolutely.
I've really enjoyed the conversation and look forward to future ones.
You're always welcome. And same with you, listeners. Thank you for listening and telling all your friends to listen to the next ones and the previous ones, and certainly to this one. Have a good day, Tyler, and I will see you around as everyone else will.
All right. Thanks, Dan.